Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Thursday evening shir, a series on the Torah's telling of the life stories and lessons that we learn from Dovid Hamelech. The part of the story that we're up to is where Dovid has just survived his experiences by a king called Achish or Avimelech, the king of Gas, a non-Jewish king. Dovid initially ran there to hide. And yet, while he was there, his identity is discovered. He is discovered as the one who is single-handedly responsible for Goliath, the hero and warrior of the Plishtim, of the Philistines, and David's life was in danger. He manages to narrowly escape by feigning, by pretending to be insane. When he acts this way, the king refuses to believe that he is in fact David, the mighty warrior who killed Goliath, and David once again narrowly escapes, and he's able to make his way out. If you have a text in front of you, I'm studying Shmuel Aleph, the first book of Shmuel, Perek Chof Beis, chapter 22. The challenge that faced David now was this. He needed a place to run. He needed a place to hide and escape, because his father-in-law, the king of the Jews, Shaul Hamelech, has made it clear that he wants to kill him. He doesn't want to hide among the Jews. He doesn't want to ask a Jewish entity to hide him. He doesn't want to take refuge in any Jewish city, because he's concerned, legitimately so, that any city or that any group of Jews or that any individual of influence who will give him refuge, who will provide for him lodging, a place to stay, and a hiding place within which he may escape, and even temporarily, the wrath of Shaul Hamelech. Any such place, any such city, any such group of people will themselves face the wrath of Shaul, who might kill them, who might destroy the city, and who might, God forbid, wipe them out. As in fact happened with a city that David ran to, we learned about 2 or 3 weeks ago, called Noiv, the city of Koyanim, where David went to seek refuge. He asked for provisions, he asked for food, and when it became known to Shaul that this city, Noiv, the city of Koyanim, had helped David, he had 85 Koyanim in the city. He had them all, may Hashem protect, he had them all massacred. So David doesn't want to seek refuge or hide among the Jews. So he's forced to go and seek refuge and look for a place to stay by the non-Jews. Of course, whenever he goes to the non-Jews, whenever he's Israel then, just like it is today, is surrounded by anti-Semites and people who seek the destruction and annihilation of the Jews. So he's kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place. But not wanting to ever, God forbid, endanger a Jew, David tries once again to find a hiding place and a place to escape among the non-Jews. The pasuk says, "Vayelech David misham." After David escapes there, he escapes the Plishtim, the Philistines. He runs away from the king. Vayemolet, he ran to a cave that belonged to a tribe or a group of people called Adulam or Adulamites. And we've heard about them before, previously in the Torah. Maybe we'll get to that soon. And David runs there to a cave in the section that is under the rulership of a tribe or of a group of people called Adulamites or Adulam. And his own family, his brothers, his father's house, his family, and some Jews hear about his new place of hiding, that he's hiding in this cave in the portion of Adulam. Okay. Eventually, David will make his way actually to Moab, where he'll seek refuge by the king of Moab, but that's going to happen next. What happens now at this point in David's life is something actually, the Torah kind of just says it nonchalantly, but it's something incredibly significant. You see, David has, of course, been appointed as a king. Shmuel Hanavi poured holy oil on his head and declared him to be the king. So he's destined to be the king over Israel. Nobody knows about this, or at least very few people know about it. It's a well-kept secret. But in fact, it is David's fate to be king. Chazal tell us, the rabbis say, quote, Ein melech b'loi am. There's no such a thing as a king without a people. You can't be a king if you have no nation. You can't be a monarch if you have no kingdom. Until this point, Dovid has been, in theory, a king. He's been technically a king. He's been anointed as a king, but he's been a melech b'lo yam. He's been a king without a people. Nobody, there's been no nation. At this point in the story, when Dovid narrowly escapes the Philistine kings, Dovid, for the first time in his life, gets a following. A group of people apparently impressed or empathetic, impressed with what they've heard about Dovid, or empathetic to Dovid. Whatever it was that motivated them to come forward at this point, but a group of people, the Torah says, a group of people gathered together around Dovid, and a group of Jews, that is, gather around Dovid, and they become his first fledgling nation, if you will, his first fledgling group of subjects. The first time Dovid is actually a king over a group of people is at this point. How many people does his melucha? Is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. How many people does David's melucha begin with? Again, the man who would become, with time, the icon of royalty. The David Melech Yisrael, the eternal king over all the Jewish people, a man anointed by the prophet of Hashem. With how many people does his melucha begin? The Torah says, Ka'arba meyos ish. Approximately 400 people, which isn't, of course, which isn't insignificant. It's a significant amount of people. But eventually, Dovid would be king over all of Klal Yisrael and for all eternity. Humble beginnings, my friends, humble beginnings. His melucha, his royalty begins with 400 people. And the Torah spares no detail in describing what type of people these were. Vayiskabtzu love, says the Torah, they gathered around him, kol ish mitzoi, every man who was in distress. V'chol ish asher lo noishen, and every man who had a creditor, every Jew who was in debt to another Jew. V'chol ish mar nefesh, and every Jew with a bitter soul gathered around Dovid, and they became his first subjects. Approximately 400 of them. Now, Dovid's career just took a serious promotion. He's now not just a king in theory, he's now an actual king. Approximately 400 Jews have gathered around him. Yes, individuals with baggage, distressed people, people with bitter souls, people who were in debt. In those days, there was no such thing as just filing Chapter 11 and wiping away your debt. Didn't exist. Excuse me, if you owed money, it became your life sentence. These kinds of people gathered around Dovid. Okay, now David's responsible for 400 lives. But among these 400 people, or in addition to these types of people, the embittered, the indebted, the broken-hearted people who gather around Dovid. In addition to that, Dovid also at this point in his life is surrounded for the first time by some very important people in his life. His father, his mother, and his 7 brothers joined the ranks of David's subjects at this point. So he's got 400 people, including Yishai, his father, his mother, and 7 brothers. Again, remember, when Dovid was first born, his father rejected him as a mamzer, as an invalid son. His brothers rejected him. But at this point, not only is he accepted by his father, mother, and family, but his father and mother and family actually, maybe, when his family saw that 400 Jews gathered around him and saw that his career as a leader was actually beginning, they joined the ranks. And they too joined the group of people who surrounded Dovid. And now Dovid needs to find a place for everybody. Once again, he refuses to seek refuge among the Jews. So here Dovid does something bold and interesting. But unfortunately, disaster strikes once again. Dovid decides he's going to approach the king of Moav. Why the king of Moav? Well, after all, him and the king of Moav, of course, were cousins. Rus, the great-great-grandmother of David Hamelech, was a descendant of Egloin, King Moav, a couple of generations beforehand. So David and the king of Moav are third or fourth or fifth cousins, or whatever the case may be, and David thinks, isn't it my good mazel? I'm looking for a place to hide myself, my 400 people, my family, my father, my mother, I'm looking for a place to hide them. Where else do you go other than family? Blood is thicker than water. And he contacts the king of Moav and he says, look, I need refuge. The king of the Jews, my own father-in-law, Shaul Hamelech, wants to kill me. And the king of Moav concedes. The king of Moav says, okay. And David finds refuge for him, for his men, and for his family. And the pasuk, somewhere in Moav, David and his men and his people and his family are given a place to settle down, where they do. Now the pasuk says, "Vayeshvu imoi kol yimei hayos David b'Metzuda." David settled in the place in Moav, referred to by the Torah as the Metzuda. The Metzuda, I believe, is not actually the name of the place. The Metzuda translates as the stronghold. It was probably just a well-fortified place somewhere in the land of Moav where David could be safe. He could stake out his men that they could see if danger was coming, if Shaul perhaps had discovered his whereabouts, had located him, sent some men to kill him. Some place in Moav that was a fortress, that was a stronghold, David settles there with his family. The Torah says that as long as David was there, in this place, in Metzuda, his family lived with him. Now Rashi brings here from the Midrash that actually the story of David's family living in Moav ends, Rahman al-Islam, in absolute disaster. You see, the king of Moav wasn't really planning to be kind to David. He faked it. He was being superficial about it. As soon as David turned his back and left, the king of Moav killed David's father, mother, and 6 out of his 7 brothers were killed. The only one who survived is one of David's brothers, I don't remember the name, who's saved by an individual called Nachash or Amoni, which is a whole separate story. But other than that, the king of Moav kills the entire family of David Hamelech, his father, his mother, and all of his brothers. Okay. What he actually does, the Midrash says, is when David, as long as David is there, the king of Moav doesn't touch them. Either he's afraid or he's still trying to conceal his true intentions. But as soon as David leaves and goes, to wherever it is that he went, he made a tribunal. The king of Moav makes a tribunal and he accuses his own great-grandmother, Rus, as being a traitor. He says, Rus, the daughter of Egloin, the king of Moav, rebelled against us. She embarrassed us and disgraced our nation, the nation of Moav, and our religion, and she went and she converted to Judaism. What is the law, asked the king of Moav, for this woman called Rus, who turned her back on her own people, Moav, and went and became a Jew? And they all said, well, she gets capital punishment. The king said, but Rus is not around. Her family is around. Her descendants are around. Yishai, her grandson, his wife, all of his sons are all there. And they sentenced them, Rahman al-Islam, immediately to death, and they're all killed. It's very interesting. It's fascinating that there's little in the commentaries that covers, that gives us insight into this terrible tragedy in the life of David Hamelech, how David reacted to it, how he dealt with it. There's very little material on this. But be it as it may, David's plan to hide himself and his men and his family somewhere in the nation of Moav backfired on him, and the king of Moab wiped out his family. Only one brother of them all manages to escape. What we do see from here, though, is the terrible difficulties, the tragedies, the suffering that Dovid went through in the beginning of his life, in the beginning of his career, in the beginning of his path, the path to royalty. How in David's case it was littered with rejection and pain and really disaster and one horrific calamity after the next, to the point that his own family is wiped out within a short time after they choose to join forces with him and hide out together with him somewhere in Moab. Even the 400 men that Dovid does manage to gather, who gather around him, are described by the Torah as being from the lower echelons of society, individuals who were in debt, who were brokenhearted, who were distressed, who were bittered souls, etc. But here there is a very interesting Alshich, one of the very famous commentators in the Tanakh, called the Alshich, lived in the same time approximately as the Arizal, as the Holy Ari, in the city of Tzfas. They davened, in fact, in the same shul. Here there is a very fascinating commentary of the Alshich on a nuance in the pasuk that gives us some kind of spiritual perspective into what's going on here. I mentioned before that when David ran away from the Plishtim, he ran to a cave that belonged to a nation or a sub-nation or a tribe of a nation called Adullam. Says the Alshich, if you pay attention, we've heard of this before. The Torah has once before mentioned this tribe of Adullam. Where is this? Says the Alshich, you have to dig deep into your biblical memory here. In Parshas Vayeshev, the Torah tells a very, very famous story. It's a famous story known as Yehuda and Tamar. The story, of course, you all know, is that Yehuda has 3 sons. Er, Oinon, and Shelah. We've discussed this before. He married off his oldest son, Er, to a beautiful woman called Tamar. But Er sinned before Hashem, the details of which are not for now, and Hashem had him, and he perished. Yehuda had this beautiful woman, Tamar, marry his second son, Oinon. But he too sinned the same way his older brother did, known as the sin of Er and Oinon, and he perished as well. Now we had a third son called Shelah, who by right, according to the laws of Yibum, he would have had to give Tamar. It was expected that he would give Tamar to his younger son Shelah, but he already lost 2 sons over this, and he didn't want to give Tamar, this woman, to his son Shelah, so he sent her home. Okay. Now you all know the story. Tamar can see, she can see through prophecy, she's a tremendous woman spiritually. She can see spiritually that she's destined to have children, descendants from Yehuda. And so on one particular day, the Torah says that Yehuda was on his way to shear his sheep, which once upon a time was a great celebration. And Tamar knows exactly which road he's planning to take, and she disguises herself as a harlot, and she sits on the side of the road. She manages to get Yehuda's attention. Yehuda hires her. There's quite a lengthy discussion back and forth between Yehuda and Tamar about how he's going to pay her for her services. She insists that she wants a gediizim. She wants a kid goat from his flock. Yehuda accepts. And she says, okay, but you don't have it with you. I insist that you give me a guarantee. So Yehuda says to Tamar, what do you want as a guarantee that I'm going to send you a kid goat from the flock? And she says, I want your signet ring. I want your staff, chaysamcha, psilecha, omatcha asher b'yodech. Different personal items of Yehuda, his ring, his staff, etc. And Yehuda gives them to Tamar. And he has relations with her. And she becomes pregnant with twins, 2 boys. When it comes time to deliver these 2 boys, the Torah says, one stuck out his hand first. the midwife, the woman who was helping Tamar give birth, tied a string around the boy who stuck his hand out first. But he pulled his hand back in and the other one came out first. And they called him Peretz, which means to break forth, because as he was born, the midwife was surprised and she said, Ma porasto lecha poretz, what is this that you've broken through? Your brother stuck his hand out first, and yet he came out first. They called his name Peretz. They called the other brother Zorach. Peretz and Zorach, two twin sons of Yehuda and Tamar. Born to Yehuda and Tamar through a relationship where Yehuda didn't know who it was that he was actually with at that time. From Peretz, the Torah tells us, came ultimately all the descendants of Yehuda, all the royal descendants, all of the kings that came all from Shevet Yehuda, including Dovid Hamelech, including Dovid Hamelech's great-grandfather, Boaz, including their grandfather, Nachshon ben Aminadav, etc. They all came from Peretz. Peretz, again, the oldest child, the son born first from Yehuda and Tamar. But the entire story of Yehuda and Tamar is introduced by the Torah with these words. Bereshis perek lamed ches. Vayhi be'esahi, the Torah says it was at that time, this is right after the selling of Yosef. Yehuda went down from his brothers demoted him, they were upset. The brothers were upset with Yehuda for not convincing them to save Yosef's life. The Torah says, here it is, Ad ish adulami. Yehuda, is feeling kind of rejected by his family. When the dust settled after the sale of Yosef, the brothers weren't happy with the way Yehuda dealt with it. They said, Yehuda, you convinced us to save Yosef's life. You could have convinced us not to sell him into slavery. When they saw Yaakov's pain over how much he was suffering over the loss of Yosef, they were upset with Yehuda and they rejected him. And Yehuda went, the Torah says, Ad ish adulomi, to an Adulamite man. His name was Chiron, and that's where he meets Tamar. That's where he gets married and has his 3 sons. And from there, the whole story evolves. Says the Alshich HaKodesh. Says the Alshich, Dovid Hamelech is running for his life. He doesn't know where to go. He can't hide by the Jews because the wrath of Shaul will be unleashed against any Jew who protects him and he'll be killed. He feels like he can't run away to the Goyim because as soon as the Goyim discover who he is, the Goyim want to discover, the Goyim will kill him too. Where's he supposed to go? Vayimolet el Ma'oras Adulam. He ran to the cave of Adulam. In the words of the Alshich. Lahazkir schus Yehuda. To elicit, to arouse the schus of his great-grandfather, David's great-grandfather, Yehuda. Sheyorad ad ish Adulami, who descended to this Adulamite man. Shemisham hoya hayasoid v'aschol livnois malchus b'Yisrael. That's where all royalty among Jews began. When Yehuda went down ad ish Adulami. And so at this point in David's life, when he finds himself rock bottom, nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, nobody to protect him, no wares, no assets, no nothing. He once again goes to the same place, to Adulam, and begins to rebuild his life again. One would have hoped that once he does begin to experience a little bit of success and 400 men, 400 Jews gather around him, his family comes around him, at least, one would have hoped that at least at this point, the path of Dovid Hamelech would be smooth and he would go only up from here. And yet, even here, once again, disaster strikes again and his own family is taken away from him. Rahman al-Islam. It's not for us to ask, why did these things happen? Why is David's path to royalty littered with so much heartbreak and bloodshed, so much persecution and pain? His family is killed. For the first 28 years of his life, his family rejected him. I mean, every turn, his life was bitter and miserable and painful. It's not for us to ask why Hashem does these things, because We don't know why, and nobody should ever try to pretend like they do know why. But what the Torah is definitely showing us is that there were two extremes in David's life. On the one hand, Dovid enjoyed a malucha, a royalty like no one else. I mean, in terms of his success and accomplishment, in terms of his being chosen by Hashem as the ancestor of all the Jewish kings for all eternity, in terms of the mark he made in Jewish leadership and royalty, no one comes close to him. And yet the price he paid, or the path he led in order to get there, no one paid I shouldn't say no one, very few in Torah paid that kind of a price for what it is that they have to be. It's for this reason as well that the rabbis explain that David's melucha, David's royalty, is compared to the moon. As opposed to the sun, the moon's light is never the same. From one day to the next, it's always changing. For the first half of the month, it grows. For the second half of the moon, it wanes. It's either getting bigger or it's getting smaller. It's either getting brighter or it's getting darker. It's either full and powerful, or sometimes you look into the heavens and you cannot see it at all. There were times in David's life when there were parts of David's life where we look at it and say his contribution surpasses anyone else. And there are parts of David's life that we look at and say his suffering, the moments of pain, the humility, the grueling process that he went through seems also to be one that very few people, if any, even Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't go through this kind of a process like Dovid Hamelech goes through. Once again, not for us to ask why, but for us to observe and take an important lesson. There are times when we feel powerful. There are times when we feel weak. There are times when we feel like we're on top of our game and we're invincible. There are times when we feel like we're bathed in humiliation and shame. Here was David Hamelech, who'd been told by Hashem that he was going to be the king over the Jews. He wakes up one morning, he's surrounded by 400 people, each one of them with a different story. Zahakt und zeklapt. 400 individuals in debt. Bitter individuals, the Torah says, mar nefesh. You know what mar nefesh means? Embittered souls. People who had been through pain and suffering, perhaps like him, perhaps more, perhaps less. Kol ishmotzaik, every man who'd been distressed. They'd all gathered around David Hamelech. David wakes up one morning, he's got 400 of these individuals. His family's been wiped out. And he's David Melech Yisrael. He's the king of all the Jewish people. What kept him going? I think it's safe to say that what kept him going was his unshakable trust in Hashem. He knew and he believed with every fiber of his being that no matter what came his way, the promise of Hashem to him would be fulfilled. He knew his day would come. And he knew that everything that he was going through, he went through in order to go to where it is that he had to go. And for this reason, this is perhaps what the Alshich means when the Alshich says that he went back to the same place, to the same idea where it all began with Yehuda, to an Adulamite. And he said, look, Rabbeinu Shalom, I don't know why you've chosen to make the royal family of the Jewish people come from such humble beginnings, come from such questionable beginnings. I mean, Yehuda and Tamar, a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law. All right, it was before Matan Torah. There's all sorts of halachic shenanigans to explain how it was permissible. Okay, But it wasn't just that. It was so many other questionable elements to the yichus of Dovid Hamelech, a convert of Moya of Rus. Moya of themselves came from Lot and his daughters. I mean, everything is complicated. And yet it was from these humble beginnings, from this, that Hashem chose that the Skion of Dovid and the royal family and ultimately Melech HaMashiach himself should come from this. It was like Hashem's way of saying, ultimate royalty has to come from the most humble beginnings. And so when Dovid finds himself in the most difficult of positions, running for his life with nowhere to go and nowhere to hide, he goes right back to the same place where Yehuda went when Yehuda himself was rejected by his own brothers. And it's there that he finds, as Yehuda did, and as Dovid would have to do over and over again, it's there that he finds the one thing in his life that he can hold on to, that will never leave him, his trust in the promise of Hashem. And here the Midrash says, I conclude with this, because it's a fascinating idea. Here the Midrash says the Midrash drops one more bomb. The Pasuk says that around Dovid gathered, quote, Kol Ish Motzaik. The simple meaning of Ish Motzaik is a man who was in distress. Says the Midrash, who were these men in distress? On a simple level, it means people who had hard lives. The Midrash says no. Eilu Talmidei Chachamim. These were the scholars of the generation. Ein mitzukin elo Talmidei Chachamim shenemar vayiskabtzu elov kol ish motzaik. Men of distress, says the Midrash, are really the Talmidei Chachamim. Why are the Talmidei Chachamim called men or individuals of distress? Because they too, the Talmidei Chachamim themselves, have also gone through, each one in their own right, they've also gone through this process. Anyone who has succeeded spiritually has in his or her own life experienced at least one moment of a humble beginning where they looked at themselves and said, I have nothing at this point in my life other than Hashem's promise. I have nothing here together with me other than my bitochen and my trust in Hashem. It's a beautiful, ironic legend about a particular individual. I heard it about a particular individual, but I don't want to say a name because I don't know if it's true about this person. I don't even know if the story itself is true, but it's a beautiful legend nonetheless. And the legend goes that there was a man who was a Yid. He had a beautiful family and he had a beautiful business and he was successful in everything that he did. And Hashem had really blessed him in his life. And one day it was before Pesach and his servants went down to the river to toivel a brand new set of very expensive dishes that they had purchased, especially for the Yom Tov of Pesach. And as they were standing there by the river or by the sea or whatever the case may be, a wave came and washed away all the dishes, schlepped them all out to sea, and they were all gone. They were so afraid, they ran home to their master, it was a wealthy Yid, a frum Yid, a tzaddik. They were afraid to tell him what had happened. They were nervous. Well, maybe he would make them pay for the dishes. They came back and they said to him, Rebbe, all the dishes that we were planning to toivel, a wave came and washed them all away. He said, don't worry about it, it's fine. We'll buy different dishes. So he sent them out and they bought a second set of dishes. And they went out the next day to the river or to the sea and they go back to the same place. And as they're about to toivel these new dishes into the sea, a wave comes and washes back up all the dishes from the previous day and puts them right back at the sea bank. Now they have two sets of dishes, one from the day before, one from this day. They toivel all the dishes, they run back to their master, they're so excited, they say, Rebbe, the dishes that were lost yesterday were found today. They said, you're a rich man, you're a blessed man, look at this, they say to him. Everything is here. If you want, you can return the new set of dishes, you can get your money back, especially if it was at Bed Bath & Beyond. If you want, you can use them both for Pesach, one for Milchik, one for Fleshik, it's all yours. And the wealthy man looks at them He says, what? The waves brought back the dishes that they took away yesterday? Yes, they said, it's a miracle, it's amazing. He began to weep and cry profusely, as if he just lost a loved one, Rahman al-Islam. Everybody was puzzled. What kind of a reaction is that? Crying over such a gift, such a miracle? Sure enough, they celebrated Pesach, but the man's spirit was broken, and he wouldn't say why. And of course, within a few weeks after Pesach, his mazel turned, and everything went south. In time, he lost his money. In time, he lost his associates, his connections. In time, he lost his investments. He lost everything from Aleph till Taf. He was left a poor man. He couldn't hold on to his employees. He couldn't hold on to his workers. He could hardly hold on to anybody. Only a few very, very small group of really loyal, servants stayed with him. Everybody else, hundreds, thousands of people, his associates, his friends, is gone. He was left with his family, desolate and oni meduka, a poor man without 2 pennies to rub together. This went on for a couple of years. He had fallen from grace. One day was Erev Shabbos, and he went to the mikveh, as many Jews do Erev Shabbos. And while he was toveling in the water, he tovels in the water, he comes out and he looks around, and he can't find his pants. He can't find his pants. Looks here, looks there. Somebody had stolen his pants in the mikveh. And this individual started dancing with a simcha that nobody had seen before. They thought he went out of his mind. They thought he went crazy. What happened? He said, somebody stole my pants in the mikveh. Anyways, he didn't have money to buy another pair of pants. They went, they gathered a few bucks together, they purchased from a new pair of pants, and they bought it for him. And of course, within a very short while after that, his mazel turned once again. Success shone upon him again. And within a short amount of time, he became much more successful than he was before. Wealthier, stronger, more influential, more powerful. And he rebuilt himself 10 times as much. And one day, he was in a really good mood. And he said to his servants, any of you can ask me anything. You can all ask me any question you like. And one servant raised his hand and said, Master, Rebbe, he says, I was with you the whole time. I was with you through the highs, through the lows. I was with you always. He said, I want you to tell me why you cried when the dishes were returned and why you danced when your pants were stolen. And he said, it's so simple, can't you see? Chazal said, the rabbi said, this tzaddik compare the world and all that is in it to a giant circle, to an igol agodl, to a giant. In Yiddish they call it a redele. A redele means a wheel. He says, the day that the waves of the sea brought back my dishes from the day before, I said, Oi Gewalt, I'm at the top. At the top, he says, there's only one way from there, and that is down. And when I saw that even a lousy pair of dishes wasn't being taken away from me, I knew, Rahman al-Islam, that I was headed for disaster. My muzzle was about to turn, and I was about to lose everything, and that's why I cried. He said, but when I was so poor that I had nothing left, and everybody left me, and only the couple of loyal ones stayed with me, and even those people I couldn't pay. And then to top it all off, one day my own trousers are stolen in the mikveh. I knew that I was right there at the bottom. And there was only one way we were going from there, and that is up. And so I celebrated because I could tell that from here, only greatness and only success and only the most wonderful brachas lay ahead for me. The perspective of a tzaddik. When things look like they're at their lowest point ever, right there, the tzaddik can see all the brachas of Hashem, will begin to materialize. Dovid, despite everything he went through, didn't but for one moment doubt that the brachos of Hashem would be fulfilled in him. He knew he was king. He knew that after him, all of the kings of the Jewish people for all eternity, including Mashiach, would all be his descendants. He knew he would be the one to be Zoicha, to locate the one eternal house of Hashem and set the Beis HaMikdash into motion. He was going to write the Sefer Tehillim that the Jews would daven from for all eternity. He was all him. And with every disaster that came his way, and with everything that was taken away from him, and every time his life seemed like it was hanging there by a thread, his betochen in Hashem only became stronger. And the Talmidei Chachamim, who they themselves acquired their Torah learning and their Torah appreciation through their own setbacks, who they themselves found comfort in their own Torah learning when their own lives seemed like everything else had been taken away from them. They saw this virtue in Dovid. They saw this greatness in him. And so they were attracted to him even at that point and became his people, became his Hasidim, if you will, his nation. When Dovid had nothing but 400 men in debt, embittered souls, and even his own family, Rahman al-Islam, was massacred by Melech Moav. Because a true king, in the words of David HaMelech, Al tiftechu ben divim, never places his trust in generous human beings, in any kind of human being, Shaina Yehoshua. Instead, he's always, a true leader is always connected and placing his trust in Hashem. And all the brachas of Hashem are always fulfilled upon him. May Hashem bless us all with a year full of nachas and gesund, and only the most wonderful brachas going from here forward. Have a wonderful Shabbos.